Hi everyone, I'm Mary, and today we'll be looking at the next part of Star Wars with Warhammer 40k, Episode 20, Oh Death, Where is your Sting? I have no idea what that's a reference to. My initial thought is, oh brother, where art thou? But if that's the reference fan was going for, I am very curious to see how that will work out. I doubt it! Because I just see a bunch of troopers, Cadian and Imperial. There's still a Republic. Cadian and Stormtroop. Republic clone trooper. I'm probably showing my bias in time frame for Star Wars. I realize that. More importantly, I'm kind of curious to see what happens because last time around, a lot of stuff happened. I've been told it does actually get resolved. But not anytime soon. So, stealth R2-D2, Anakin being captured. I'm putting that on the back burner for who knows how many months. And I don't know if that's just based on my time to upload or how long these individual videos will take. It might actually be literal months of recorded time for all I know, because Fan is obscene in the amount of content he creates, man. So, neat. More importantly, you guys know the deal. There's a link below to the original video. Hit it up, and let's just jump right in and see where this goes. Other than crazy. Definitely crazy. Most likely crazy. I'm looking forward to crazy. Let's do it. Star Wars vs. Warhammer 40k. I like how long that came in, but I don't even recognize what that sound is. Episode 20. Or is that a lightsaber turning off? Oh, Death. Where is your sting? Unless that's a reference to older poetry, in which case I'm definitely not going to get it because I can't stand poetry. I don't have the
sound of the rifle was muted. The rain more than masking the rasp of the round being loaded into it and locked into place. Not that the Calambian marksman was anywhere near enough to an enemy to be overheard. Oh, Death, where is your sting?
Apparently it's just the first line he sang.
Where is your victory? Said Joseph, the words of his faith flowing freely under his breath as his grim work was done. He sighted down the powerful scope,
Cadian
lenses
sniper?
kept religiously clean by his care and rewarding
And probably
him
literally
with a
religiously
crisp
clean
and
as well as
clear line of
figuratively.
sight on the replique soldiers who guarded the three-legged walker tanks. They had yellow markings over their white armors and held what looked like flamers and melt-a-guns.
Oh.
The sting of death is but sin, and the strength of sin is the law of the Xenos. He whispered, eyes searching.
I thought they knew that they were
He
human
held
still.
more of the large rounds between
Because
his
they don't
fingers,
consider clones
even as he
human, probably.
used
Even
his
though-
arms to brace and aim the massive rifle. When the time came, the enemy would not know him as...
Okay, let's just be completely honest here. As far as posing goes, I've been told, and I think Kubik has actually commented a few of my videos. Actually, never mind. I know he has. 1. Good job. 2. That is obscenely huge. That's like as big as some of the models make the rifles look, but actually carried out into this entire thing. That it freaking handle is bigger than his entire hand. I mean, dear God, unless there's like massive props everywhere, like this guy is insane just for holding up the butt of it right here, even if it's rested on his shoulder. Really good posing. I mean, dear God, man. Also, do I need to censor that? I'm going to assume it's a bullet. It's a bullet. It's nothing else. It's just a bullet. YouTube, we're fine.
As a sniper, they would know him as Death, as the Orcs had known him, as the Tyranids had before them. Joseph came from a long line of marksmen, and they had refined their skills to the point of obsession.
Because feudal
Even
society
now,
usually does have
Joseph
tasks from
expected
one family to the
his
next.
son Ezekiel
or
was back with the
generation.
rest of the Calambian tugs and conveyors, being seen to a new home, assembling and disassembling his rifle all the while, dreaming of the day he could drill in earnest once more. But Joseph pushed thoughts of his son
Because he's
and
actually
family
fine. He
down,
prefers drilling,
keeping
though.
his focus on the
Because he
words
probably
of
gets
the
to shoot more that
Akasha
way.
and on his search for his target. He found it only a few seconds later, hovering near the back lines on some kind of floating sled. The massive tank that these flame troopers were using to reload and refuel
that's what the
their
troopers look like.
weapons.
Huh.
The sniper felt his lips quirk slightly.
They do
He
look
had
more
been
imperial.
uncertain that he'd be able
Probably
to
the base
spot
design,
it
of course.
from his current position, low as it was, but smothered his enthusiasm as soon as it flared up.
Oh?
The founder only condoned the taking of Xenos life, and, say what you will, these replicae were human.
So he was
Their
aware of
deaths
that,
were a
okay.
Tragic
You're just going through Dogma
necessity.
prior.
He aimed his sights for the center of the fuel tank and braced himself carefully. The round he had loaded into his anti-material rifle was tremendously explosive all on its own, and every shot from the nearly 6-foot-long weapon kicked like an Ogryn's Ripper gun.
6 foot? Dear God, that's actually at the point now where it almost exceeds some of the crazy scale choices they make in the miniatures. In the miniatures, of course, everything is kind of bigger because if you made it to scale, they're too flimsy to actually print in how GW works with either resin or plastic at this point, because another plastic game is actually pretty on par. So things are bigger, more bulky, more exaggerated, so that you can actually see them, paint them, and print them without them snapping in a small breathe. I know I should have said breeze, but honestly, breathing probably is about how flimsy they can get if they make them as small as they should be. To say that thing is 6 foot and show how Kubik pulled that thing out, this isn't a gun. This thing is a freaking anti-tank rifle that it's an anti-material rifle. Isn't that basically an anti-tank rifle, but with more options? I'm not a gun nut. I don't know. Also, this is 40K. Intentionally using incorrect terms might be a thing.
He was lying flat against the ground, his rappel ropes pooled around him.
Oh, he's hanging down?
But thanks be to the Founder, who bestows on us victory through our Lord Leto, the God Emperor. The Calambian whispered.
Leto, the God Emperor. Oh, yes. I guess that does explain a lot of the Imperium. Fear is the mind killer, and they want to kill everyone's mind. But where's a giant sandworm when you need it? For those of you who don't get out why I'm geeking out here, God Emperor Leto is one of the God Emperors from Dune, specifically the second one. I think it was Leto the second because Paul was the first emperor. His son became the God Emperor. This isn't a spoiler. The book's been out for decades. Previous century, even. So, the fact is, like, God Emperor, it's like, really, fan, you're just randomly throwing out that they're naming the God Emperor of mankind Leto because in this version he kept him more human instead of giant worm monstrosity. He was following a golden path. Ultimately, it was self-destructive, and it did overall work in the end, but not in the best possible way. I thought this was just a runaway note, but is this a third crossover and we didn't realize it? No one's mentioned that, and I don't think people could hide that nearly as well. Probably just a random Easter egg that fan is dropping in more than anything else.
On us victory through our Lord Leto, the God Emperor. The Calambian whispered to himself, the words of the Akasha a calming salve on his sizzling nerves. He had been tasked with coming to this place with his spotter, who had fallen to his death as they had scaled the side of the massive park platform. But it was not the death of his friend which had him so shaken.
Oh, damn.
He'd grieve later. He'd have to. It also wasn't the knowledge that, if he got careless, his gun's recoil could kick him off the ledge, or even that his shots would be visible and loud, drawing all of the enemy's attention to his admittedly distant location.
Granted,
it was
your
that
shot
his
is loud,
shot
but the
would
explosion will be
signal
louder.
the start of Major Lazarus's plan.
Oh, this is the start of the plan?
At the sound of his gun, the rest of the Calambian patriots would begin their last-ditch effort to destroy the sniper tanks.
It's literally a starting rifle. Oh my god.
Evac from the devils barking orders back at high command. He'd never had so much responsibility heaped onto him, never been so crucial in the start of an operation.
And his friend isn't there to back him up, so he's sniping on his own without a supporter.
Were they all in place, all ready for the mission to begin? He checked his chrono and clenched his teeth. The allotted time had come and was rapidly passing. The combined survivors at the bridge were, even then, doing all they could to hold the bulk of the enemy's attention. Joseph steeled himself, leaning into his rifle. He would simply need to have faith that directly across the vast distance to the opposite side of the park platform, his brothers and sisters in arms were ready, hanging by their own rappels, prepared to come over the lip, guns blazing. Oh, death, where is your sting? He asked his rifle. The man squeezed a nearly numb finger around the gun's warm trigger, and his weapon loyally answered the question with a single, thundering shout.
There is the sting.
It spoke the language of ruin, of annihilation and finality. Its breath, the exhalation of death's response.
I have no idea what we're looking at.
Here spoke the rifle. And
oh,
in its
there's
wake,
pieces
the
of people
Reaper
there.
did sing.
And he's cutting away. And to be fair, we got exactly what we needed out of that part, so I'm not complaining as much.
Death was everywhere, raining in and around them in all its various forms. The Replique soldiers had blown down most of the Imperial barricades, but had found their intended massacre stifled by the deep trenches the Kriegers had edged out of the false earth of the park.
They're turning it around from the previous
Kriegers and all others who had managed to survive this long, crowded shoulder to shoulder with comrades and corpses, guns bristling from their jagged trench lines. The Republic's toy soldiers had been set on pelting them from a distance, but after seeing how ineffective this was and feeling how hard Imperial munitions could punch back, had chosen to roll over them in a rush of bodies and blasters instead. The troopers were infuriated, roaring in their helmets as they closed in, blasters blazing blue like neutron stars. Initially, all 13 had been able to manage was to jam himself between Julian and Emiliana.
So we are back in
single arm thrust out with his Hell pistol held aloft. From that position, he had managed to fell 3 of the incoming Replique before a blue bolt took him in the face. The glancing shots.
How many times has this guy survived being shot? I mean, his arms fucked up. He was shot multiple times, I think, in the legs and arms and chest, and now his face as well. I mean, apparently not Gating gas mask, sorry. Wow, I feel like I just fucked up there. Krieg gas masks are bulletproof. Actually, unironically, they probably are.
Sufficient to knock him from the line, or at least and out of the waking world.
Knocked him out
for a
only.
time, a long time, or a brief time.
Is he like a perpetual and no one's noticed yet?
Calm, nothing. No cares, no compulsions, no thoughts at all. And then, searing pain paired with the touch of life. 13 gasped, dragging fresh air into his lungs and almost screaming it out right away. He tried to rise, tried to bring his hand up to his burning face, but was held down. Through the haze of his pain, he barely made out Jackna's face, her violet eyes staring down into his. She yanked a syringe out of his chest, and he barely felt the spine-chilling sensation through the agony racking his face. He could feel the cold air and rain on his skin and against his wound, ripping screams out of his mouth. "Hold still! Damn it, 13! Hold still! You're going to lose a whole lot more than your eye!" She yelled through the din of battle and his own voice. He registered her order, clamping his teeth shut almost over his tongue and groaning beneath her, trying to go.
Damn, he actually can hold that much? He's a Krieger, of course he can.
The ground trembled as explosives went off near their trench, Jackna covering his face with her body and shielding him from the rain of mud and blood which followed.
Because that would get into the
backing
wound
off and
and
continuing the work. His fingers dug into the churned, wet soil, toes flexing and clawing the insides of his boots as she worked over his ruined eye with surgical gear, each snip and cut sending flashes up his skull and...
Was she the medic, or is she just doing this on an improvised basis? I'm not sure which is more impressive. Both? Let's go with both.
Pain into his very soul. He almost wished she'd just kill him instead and allow him to return to nothing. But something in him kept the desire from being quite as genuine as it would have been before.
Impressive.
Though it felt...
The reason I'm actually mentioning that is because there is a historical precedence of, prior to anesthesia, people had a habit of going to the tops of hospitals if they had surgery and not aliving. It was an actual problem that had happened frequently enough that it was well known, understood, and not remarkable in its own right. That if you had surgery that involved anything physical or more impressive than a cast, or literally a splint at that point, that was a problem that they had to legitimately consider. And he's just dealing with it. In his head, this is a level of, I don't even think most Kriegers could deal with parts of their body being ripped out and then dealing with someone ripping out more to fix it. I'm assuming they have a mechanical one they're just going to plop in there and it'll just plug in automatically because it does that and they don't realize. That's par for course with the level of technology I think they have. It's way harder than they actually believe or understand, but because they don't understand it, they think it's just super durable, and also it is. And then they do some understand it, and they don't. It just, yeah. 40k tech is hard to pin down intentionally. Still, the fact he can deal with it is actually very much a mark in his favor.
Work, flicking away a bloody ball of something 13 tried not to think about, before using some kind of spray on the burnt parts of his face. Right away, he sighed, twitching limbs easing up and going still, letting him catch his breath and recover for a brief time as she wrapped her work in bandages, tying them off tightly. My gun, 13 muttered as she pulled away.
Of course, that's what he goes for first.
For a moment, as if she did not quite understand.
He wants to go back to the line.
She made sense of his words and laughed, taking a moment to fish the pistol from some place beside her. She didn't hand it to him, instead sliding it into the holster at his side. "Don't move, you plank," she told him. "You're barely holding together, and I doubt your heart can take another stim of any kind. Just sit tight and try not to get shot anymore." She had started to say, but as she did, 13 saw something terrible. Above her, he could see the lip of their trench, and standing there, having just arrived, was a replique of the Republic.
Hey, I remember the last episode where he was in, and it was like, death flags for everyone, because she was flirting with him because he had no idea how to deal with it. And, no, come on, fan, don't you... It's either an actual death here, or he's just waving that death flag super hard.
Shouldering its gun and preparing to fire. He reacted without thinking, grabbing Jackna by the arm and throwing her away.
The good thing his heart is so healthy right now.
The trooper fired, catching the medic's left arm instead of her back. The shot hit dead on, and the woman screamed as the unguarded limb was blown clean off. She curled around the...
Wait, their guns can do that? I honestly thought they just burned and internally fried. Unless they went to a different variation of it, probably. I think I've been told red and blue are different variations. Yeah, so blue is probably the one that has way more stopping force.
Stump of her lost arm, going still shortly after, and 13 knew not if she had died from shock or merely lost consciousness. And he had no time to find out. He rolled in the mud, fumbling to draw his returned firearm, but not managing to pull it free before the Republic trooper had sighted him and fired. The trooper only scored a near miss, as its shoulder and most of the back of its head were blown into a red rain by a close-quarters blast from Julian's shotgun. 13 was grateful, but there was not even a moment for a brief thanks as more of the replica arrived at the lip, firing down all along the line. Julian discharged his shotgun into another clone looming over them, and 13, pistol now in his hands again, covered him by lancing 2 holes in another soldier that was attempting the very same thing on Julian. When a third warrior emerged from the raining gloom of their trench line, the Cadian greeted it with an empty shotgun, pitched right into its face. 13.
He actually threw the shotgun? Oh my god. I mean, to be fair, if you don't have ammo for it, it's not actually going to help you. Also, just pointing out here, and I'm sure everyone else has realized this by now, 13. Useless arm, broken shit, shot multiple times, had his face blasted, lost an eye, was being cut up and stimmed out of his mind to the point where his heart is probably about to give out. And he immediately pulls a gun and starts popping away at enemies while probably not even being able to move. This guy, if he's not a perpetual, he is just basically Rambo without training, but somehow all the muscle memory. Which actually might be entirely intentional because of the bullshit when it comes to all of Krieg and how they create people. Huh.
13 finished that one as well, putting 3 holes in its chest, but not before it tossed a present of its own into their trench.
Oh, hell.
Grenade. Julian dove to the ground, scrambling for it and grasping it with cold hands. He rose and reared high to pitch the damn thing when it went off, still clutched in his hand. Julian's body seemed to pop, smearing his blood, bones, and armor across the trench, and only narrowly avoiding 13, who was already on the ground. His head was ringing from the pressure of the blast, and he could barely make out what was happening around him with his one remaining eye. Was Emiliana still alive? Was anyone?
Oh, it was Emiliana, not
groaned, feeling the rain washing the mud and blood off of his face and bandages as he rose to his feet. Feeling more than hearing the thump beside him as someone jumped down into the trench. The Imperial spun, ducking and narrowly avoiding the swung butt of a clone rifle, planting
There's
his
more!
into the ground.
And if they're already overwhelming him, then that means Emilion's probably down.
Pistol into the replicate's chest and fired, creating holes in the enemy soldier.
God damn!
But it was not the only one. 13 spun again, pressing himself against the side of the trench and barely avoiding a cascading line of death issued by a minigun-wielding replicate. The plasma weapon spat out a volley of fast bolts, scything down the trench and killing more guardsmen.
Okay, seriously, Fan, where the hell did you get this mix? Because this background beat is intense. It's not overwhelming, but it really does hype it up.
13 waited for the blaster fire to pass before leaning out, extending his one good arm to fire, and pulled the trigger.
Did he actually get a kill?
Yet, his shot sailed through empty air without connecting.
Okay, that would be too much bullshit otherwise.
Dove down into the trench, catching his arm and wrestling 13 down to the ground. The Krieger kicked and struggled, grunting and gritting his teeth as the clone elbowed him in the face and forced open his hand. 13 panted, kneeing the replicate's armored torso again and again.
Does he have a shovel at least?
But getting nowhere and feeling a pit open in his stomach as his gun was forced from his fingers.
Oh, that's not
The
good.
replicate trooper tossed away its own cumbersome rifle, drawing its own blaster pistol as it continued to wrestle
range,
with
yeah.
the Krieger. 13 fought hard, but was one-armed and
Here's a
wounded,
saver when he needs
leaving
one.
him at a distinct disadvantage at the riddle almost into 13's mouth before it was kicked off of him, T-visor shattering against Gregor's boot. The big man shot the enemy a few times with his lasgun and reached down, grasping the Krieger by his collar and lifting him up without apparent effort, pinning him to the wall briefly as he set the soldier upright. "Come on, kid!" he barked, having no more time to speak as he hefted his lasgun up and opened up a spray of fire, catching the minigunner just as it had begun to sweep its weapon back down towards their direction. The clone screamed and fell, body smoking as it landed atop a pile of others 2 men deep.
God damn, man. You can't see it, but I got freaking... Actually, you might be able to see it. I got freaking goosebumps from this thing, man. Here, if I can get it right here. Okay, apparently it's just not going to zoom in on the arm, but just trust me when I say that I got goosebumps on this. I don't... This is probably one of the most bullshit intense fights. Not because of all the other fights not being bullshit. They were some amazing fights, and I absolutely love them. But this one, this is with characters who have enough presence that I remember them, but not enough that I think they need to survive. I think 13 will, just because people mention he's a fan favorite, and if this was the only portion, that would tell me nothing, because I've been told people die often in this. So every single person here is a red shirt for all I know, and maybe they just luckily survive. Also, I realize I'm wearing a red shirt today. That was not intentional. But more importantly, it gives it way more weight to this fight, because it could go bad. Where the previous ones, I also know it could go bad, but I don't believe it will nearly as much, because Fan had basically said flat out, plot armor was an in-game actual concept, because Force is bullshit. That's also why Anakin lost as soon as he didn't have it.
As this was happening, replicate soldiers from behind them opened fire, cracking and shattering the flak armor Gregor wore and scorching his body badly.
Ooh.
But the huge Cadian did not drop.
God damn!
For the Emperor!
He's literally too angry to die.
Staggering around and leaning against the muddy wall as he loosed his fire against them. The scattering shots less than accurate, yet the cover in the trench affording the Republic troops little options for escape. Blue shots punched into Gregor again and again, but the man only slumped down to a sitting position once the 2 clones before him had dropped. The third managing to scramble back up and out of the trench before he followed suit. The young Krieger watched it all, mud flowing over the sides of the pits they were fighting in and streaming thickly over his arms and neck. Looking on, he could see the big man was breathing raggedly and bleeding from several wounds that 13 guessed were or would be lethal.
Yep.
Still, he couldn't stop himself from coming to the Cadian's defense as another clone leapt over the lip and began firing. 13 yelled, running with all the might he had left as the replicate.
And that's something that I absolutely want to highlight here, because this is a moment that you don't see nearly as much in depictions of Krieg especially. fighting to defend someone else, not to run in and to die. Suicidal bravery, yeah, no, Krieg all the time. Obscene human wave tactics, Krieg all the time. Throwing yourself into the jaws of defeat to rip victory out of someone's mouth and gullet and maybe digestive tract that have already been started to act screen, and you're pulling it out the other way because it's the hard option, that's where they want to go. Sure, Krieg, why not? Jumping to someone else's defense to save them, even if they know it's not going to, probably. That's a level of empathy that I freaking love seeing on display, especially in hyper-aggressive, violent moments like this, where your blood is just singing with adrenaline listening to it. Speaking from experience, of course.
A soldier turned to face him, feeling the long barrel of the blaster skipping and sliding along the armor on his shoulder before he impacted the trooper and slammed it into the opposite wall.
He just melee the guy?
They grappled, and the Krieger realized he would need help to overcome the hand-to-hand advantage the enemy had over him.
2-to-1, yeah.
Doing what he could with one arm, he eventually found that help in the form of a rigid handle pressed against the back of his arm, which was wrapped around the torso of the Republic soldier. A shovel! One of the tools which had been used to carve out the trench, left here in the haste it had taken to get ready.
He actually had a shovel.
Now his. He loosened his grip on the enemy to grab the handle, and the trooper kicked him off in response. Instead of resisting the blow, the Krieger rolled with it, spinning as he drew the digging instrument out from behind the replicate's back and slashed it across the clone's eyes, shattering the visor there. 13's back hit the muddy wall with a splat, the wet earth sucking and squelching as he pulled himself back off.
Really, Kubik, you had to go super detailed on this one here.
The replicate fell back, clutching its wounded eyes, and never rose again as 13 leapt atop him, shovel rising and falling as the Imperial hacked the clone to pieces. He would have kept hacking till his arm lost its strength, but 13 caught movement from the corner of his eye and spun. Instinct dominating his every action as he threw the shovel end over end. That saved him from the first trooper, but not the second, who shot twice, narrowly missing him as he jumped against the opposite wall. But there was nowhere to hide, and his maneuver would have done little more than purchase seconds, were it not for the beams of light which pierced the clone's head, dropping the trooper to the ground.
Who's got the save on this one?
13 panted hard, looking around for where the shots had come from, and taking several moments to spot the collapsed form of Emiliana. Half buried in liquid dirt, her rifle cradled in her right arm, his Hell pistol clutched in her left hand.
She had his gun.
Both barrels hot and smoking. She was gasping as well, and clearly wounded, though it was hard to tell how badly. The bare-faced Krieger staggered to her and bent down to help her.
Wait, he's still barefaced?
Offering his hand. She grinned with a wince at the gesture, though Emiliana
because they shot him in the face and that probably destroyed his mask. I honestly thought they just cut away the portions of it. I don't know why that's hindsight, a stupid idea. But for some reason, I still thought he was wearing most of it and just not the destroyed portions. Huh.
Pushed his pistol back into his hand and
they're seeing a little kid essentially beating the shit out of him.
13, said the corporal, voice pained. He nodded and took the weapon, and no sooner had he that he felt a hard shot crash into the back of his shoulder, smashing the flak plate there and burning his chemically treated coat. He fell face first into the mud and spun, both he and Emiliana aiming their weapons up and firing at the 3 new clones who leered into their trench. After a few tense seconds of exchanged fire, one of the replicate died and the other 2 retreated away, tossing a grenade into their wake.
Ah, hell.
The corporal sucked in a breath, but 13 acted without hesitation, sweeping his leg and kicking the round explosive into a pile of corpses several feet to their right.
And bodies will manage it.
The 2 covered their heads and braced as the thing detonated, showering them in more blood and viscera, but otherwise not harming either. They snapped their guns up, ears ringing, almost...
See, that right there, this moment, I really need to highlight. And I'm doing this a lot in this episode because he's just doing so much so fast, but Fan is just throwing a lot at you. This moment right here. Normally when you see the grenade moment, it's like, oh no, grenade! Throw it out, you're safe. Because that's how you usually treat those types of things, because you don't want your characters to die. That isn't what's happening right here, because it's the second instance. In the first instance, the person doing it failed. A tactical red shirt for a narrative's sake to show that these things are serious, as opposed to, oh, we can just deal with it by throwing it out. No, there's still a threat. There's still the possibility of failure. We saw someone fail already because they didn't have enough time. So we know how short that timer is. We know how dangerous it is. The fact that he did that is more impressive because we have seen the consequences. If it hadn't been, if it was just, oh, there was a grenade and he kicked it out. Neat. It's cool. but there's not as much weight to the action because you don't see it doing anything. It's like saying, oh my god, there's a wave coming, it's going to destroy everyone, there's a tsunami, followed by, it was a ripple. Okay, cool. It's a complete de-escalation if you don't see what it can do. Now, if you see in like a disaster movie where you see the tsunami destroy a bunch of things and then they find a way to stop another one, that's cool. If you just see it stopping without doing anything, that's not, because it's a lot less useful because you don't have the context for what it means. We have the context here, so it has way more impact, and it's such a cool scene because of that.
Bleeding and waited, listening to the rain falling, battle sounding all around them. Yet, as time dragged itself by, nothing more came for them. The two looked at each other and realized that the only sound they could hear consistently after a time was the sound of the rain. Gradually, 13 picked himself up, careful not to slip, and, with great trepidation, peeked up with his one good eye, looking over the lip of the trench. Nothing but rain and mud. "Where are they?" asked Emiliana, still laying on the ground. "Gone,"
was this fan art
said 13, turning back towards her and kneeling, holstering his gun as he began to try to help her get up to her feet. The Cadian grit her teeth and hissed, but did slowly rise, leaning against the Krieger heavily. "Gregor," she croaked through a hoarse throat. No response. "Gregor!" she yelled more loudly.
He's still alive?
I'm still alive.
How?
Corporal. He groaned from nearby. "Jackness. Here. Not moving."
Losing the
he
arm
managed to add, sounding not much better than dead.
Yeah.
"Save your breath," Emiliana said, looking around for the rest of her squad. "Where'd they go?" she asked softly, referring to the enemy.
Probably.
13 shrugged a little,
this was right
ambling next to her as they began to gather the survivors near them and put down the replique who yet lived. At first, it seemed baffling, their sudden absence, the quiet. But slowly, 13 started to pick up on fainter sounds and realized the most probable explanation as he did. "The Major," 13 said. "Huh?" asked the Cadian beside him. "It must be the Major."
Oh, I see. So what we're seeing is what's happening before that opening section about the snipers. That makes a lot more sense because they were already fighting the entire time trying to hold out. And what we saw is actually going back to show this moment here and explaining it rather than just making it a MacGuffin of, oh, thing happened. And it's doing exactly what I just talked about with showing the grenade effect. Here, we're seeing the before and after of the entire aspect of Major Lazarus's plan, which is showing, one, he's tactically really damn good. We've seen him doing smart things and being ungodly lucky and too angry to survive, which is frankly one of the most important features of anyone in the Imperial Army. Or sorry, the Imperium's army, whatever. But this is cool because we get to find out, one, this is how this happened instead of it just being an ass pull. It's a small reorientation, but it's a really important one because it makes it so much more believable and we kind of have that understanding. Well done.
Said. She paused, listened, and then nodded, flashing a pained grin. "You must be right."
Earlier. Unless I'm mistaken.
Lazarus would rather go round 2 with Rejulia, or request a transfer from Indricta than be where he was now. The wind tugged and teased, sometimes weak and sometimes making him feel like a plucked spider clinging onto a single string. The only reason he was here now, the one thing he wouldn't do, was let his men down.
Wait, Lazarus was in the shooting position as well with everyone else? Oh, I didn't know he was a sniper. Because I remember the string and holding, because they were talking about before there was other people with the initial sniper who was also held by a string, or just by that, and the gun could kick him off as well. Okay. Huh.
Technically, all the soldiers under his new command were his men, but Lazarus had been the head of a squad prior to his insane elevation, and those men were truly his brothers. Even as the wind tore at him, tempting his adhering boots to release the metal surface he walked on,
Texas Cadians?
He would not let them down. Even as he felt brand new sensations of fear and dread poking holes in his nerves, his arms kept reeling in the rappel line, feeding it into his winding belt spool. Even as he reached the position just below the lip of the platform, belt-mounted rope and magnetic soles holding him tenuously in place as he and several thousand Calambian patriots unslung various weapons, he did not falter.
That is a large amount of people hanging.
At least not too much. The former sergeant bunched the muscles in his neck, keeping his eyes fixed upwards towards the gray, raining sky. His goggles kept the water out of his eyes, but obscured the shifting, indistinct forms of the clouds and made blurry the rigid, silver towers reaching for them from the edges of his vision. As little as that view provided for him, it was leagues better than looking down and awakening within himself that foregone fear which struck him whenever he found himself gazing into a far-flung abyss.
Yeah, and considering people have told me that the distance these things are built up, because this is one of the more large planets, is sometimes above the atmosphere. They're just not in that place right now because he can still breathe. I'm assuming he's not wearing a mask. Yeah, that abyss would take a while.
Major! Hey, Major! Called one of the men around him, a thickly set man hefting a sniper rifle. Lazarus craned his neck to look at the corporal, only realizing the mistake of his instinct when the corner of his eye skimmed the drop below them, and just after he centered his vision on the soldier's shit-eating grin. His wounds, and particularly his freshly applied
he knew what he did, huh?
ached badly and ate
he definitely
his
knew.
Typical patience. The metal arm had been hastily grafted onto him by a cavalcade of Tech Priest survivors. While he was grateful to have the use of his burnt and now amputated arm back in his service, the trauma of the loss and the constant deep pain the sedated wound assaulted him with was another one of those things he was trying not to think about.
Yeah.
Glaring,
try the
he
fear,
locked
that might be easier.
eyes with his former corporal. Damn you, Jackson! You better have a good reason for getting my attention! Lazarus barked, keeping his voice from veering.
Wait, is he... Oh, because in this game, whenever you take damage, you turn red as a flash. So he literally had to set up where he just took damage to do that because he just pissed him off. Oh my god.
Into a higher than dignified pitch, though only by a few scant octaves. Sure do, Major, said the man. I understand the part of the plan that gets us here, behind the enemy while their cocks are swinging. I get that we gotta take down all their Olympic...
Okay, so maybe I had that backwards because they're talking about getting it behind the enemy. If the snipers were the first end, that was what started the bridge assault. Or maybe continued it. I think I'm all wrong here, but I'm not entirely sure. It's hard to tell.
...tanks to secure evac. But what I don't get is how we're even gonna get to evac when we mop them up.
Slowly?
That main force is gonna swing around for us, tanks or no tanks, and unless we plan to jump over the ledge, I don't see where we can pull back to.
I mean, they have floating tanks.
He knew his plan wasn't foolproof, and even though he had tried to account for this specific problem in particular, he really hoped he would not be forced to resort to it. Or any other tactics more desperate and unconventional than the one he was going to execute now. We gotta have faith that the flyboys cover us when it counts, Corporal. Stay Gumby. The Major said back, eyes aimed skyward once more.
It's probably a reference I just don't get.
So, in other words, we're properly fucked whether we win or lose. The man said back sarcastically.
Normal grunt.
Suck it up, Jackson. Whole platoon knows you've been proper fecked ever since the sisters caught you listening to Talik, said another soldier hanging nearby.
Oh, it's probably something to do with the Mechanicus, because that's the only thing Talik I can think of. Unless there's just rock in the future and they just happen to keep Metallica alive and they just change the name? Because that's the thing they do in 40k? Partially so they can avoid copyright and partially because they still want to reference real things?
Just close enough to not have to yell to be heard. Lazarus couldn't see Jackson's reaction to the barb, but he could hear the soft chuckling all around them and couldn't help but grin, particularly when the offended corporal snapped back. Empire Spire does not play Taoic music.
Oh,
you can't call literally anything played on a skier flute Taoic. Otherwise, you're just surrendering the whole genre to fucking Xenos. Hey, Jackson, how
is he a freaking music critic? Oh my god, he's a hipster! He's a hipster music critic! Well played, fan.
Would you like to join me and get saddled with a moonbeam for the duration of our time on this rock, Corporal? Lazarus asked, cutting the man off before he got too loud. He didn't see it, but Jackson shut right up, even his fresh blush washing off at the words, which he did not return. That's what I thought. That goes for the rest of you too. No more mouthing. Operation could begin any second, and it needs to come out neat and tidy if anyone is coming out of this in one piece.
Or maybe it
Regiments
was.
on the bridge are bleeding to hold the enemy's attention. We've got to make that sacrifice count.
Unless I was right, and we did see a forward timepiece jump back onto the bridge, and now we're seeing this, which is still before what we just witnessed where everything stopped. Sorry, this is actually a very complicated piece. It could all be straightforward, I'm just missing it because it's me, but it seems like this is a much more complicated timepiece than even I realized. Neat!
Har! 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 The soldiers around him said back, falling into grim silence afterwards, broken only intermittently by light chatter. And that didn't last long. Soon they all heard it, the sound of an anti-material rifle loosing its death.
And that's what I was waiting for, specifically the reference to the anti-material rifle, and it does show exactly when this is happening, because if this is stopping here and he's talking about them bleeding on the bridge, that means everything we saw was exactly as I initially thought, so I was right? Oh wow, that almost never happens. Weird.
Deadly shot, and then the deafening, roaring boom of a fiery explosion. Lazarus knew he could trust the officers under him to keep the men on time and in sync with the plan. But he couldn't help ordering the advance aloud in spite of that. Kill, he said, heedless of the fact that his Vox speed was silent, as were all the others turned off as a precaution to keep the enemy from detecting them. Captains and sergeants repeated the order all throughout the hanging line of readied soldiers. And as one, they activated their rappel spools, causing them to reel in hard and fast, almost tossing the men over the lip of the platform.
They're jumping up with
as planned, the snipers and their spotters hit the dirt and set up, as did the heavy weapons teams, aided by the few tech priests that had accompanied them. The other advancing fire teams began to divide.
See, I thought it just should be a bunch of snipers taking out strategic locations, but if they're bringing heavy weapons teams and snipers, this isn't just a tactical attack. This is a full-on fuck you fusillade. Fusillade? I don't actually know how to say that word, huh? I've only ever read it.
Racing forward as they sprinted to close the distance. As Lazarus
also, I love
hoped,
the music in the background.
Shot and
no, seriously, we're going to go back. Just, do you hear this music swelling? Like, as much as I highlighted that just deafening beat of hitting you during the sections with 13, now we're getting this swelling orchestral music showing that moment of triumph. Such a good choice. It's not overstated, it's not too loud, it's just in the background so you can barely hear it, but it's just there enough to give you exactly the emotional component to the scene.
It was the distance. As Lazarus had hoped, the loud shot and explosion had drawn all eyes and focus away from the rear of the replique's column. This bought vital seconds he and the other Calambians spent rushing for all they were worth, angling for cover and veering out of what would soon become a lethal crossfire. As soon as he slid to a stop behind a disordered stack of discarded trees, he saw the telltale blue shots that signaled that they had been spotted. Before the blue bolts could even reach their resting points, the snipers and heavy weapons teams opened up, creating thunder and flashes which could shame lightning as they tore into the rear lines of the replique. Heavy stubbers, autocannons, Calambian chain guns, bolters, and a few heavy bolters trailed lines of thick projectile fire into the men and vehicles of the Republic, ripping bodies to shreds and blowing over a few of the walkers in just the opening volley. On top of that, though they were still somewhat distant, the fire teams began to pick targets, engaging with bursts of automatic and semi-automatic fire as they continued their advance. Lazarus leading their way near the front. He had half hoped of the chaos caused by their surprises.
Yeah.
But the damned toy soldiers were clearly veterans, and they didn't scare, but they had made a fatal flaw, one which the Imperium now fully exploited. The replica commander had assumed that the enemy lay trapped before him, and so had most exclusively flamethrowers. As Lazarus is scouting servos.
Wait, they were armed with... Because it doesn't matter how many shots you put in if their armor is really good against it. Flamers light you on fire. So if they're mostly with flamethrowers now, those don't have the range to hit this force right now. So they have a much less well-armed enemy to shoot back.
Exclusively flamethrowers. As Lazarus is scouting servo skulls had reported. The replicate ran around the flaming wreckage and burnt corpses of the few felled sniper tanks and the remains of the fuel tank, raising nozzles as they advanced. Lazarus raised his fist, and his command to hold and hunker down was relayed across the squads in short order. They waited. The replicate came into effective range. Effective range of the rifles, cracking and bursting like civilian ceramics before the weighty touch of a hammer, long enough to come into effective range of their flamethrowers. Those that unleashed their lethal torrents of fire took grim satisfaction in hearing the screams of the Calambians they'd reached. But their pain,
to smoke him out,
deaths were cold comforts, for the Patriots had spread out as a matter of habit.
So they can't be easily clumped up and got with the
effectiveness of the
flamethrower.
Republic flamers spread. A few of the replicate managed to form pockets of entrenched resistance, but as holes were rent into their wider formations, the Calambians flowed in and around the defenders, boxing the troopers in and moving behind them. Lazarus surveyed the battlefield as best he could, activating his Vox speed and hearing the reports and chatter coming in from the other Calambian fighters. He was dissatisfied with how many of the men were getting hung up on those pockets of resistance, particularly given their initial advantage, but there was nothing for it. He snapped a few orders into his Vox channel, prepared to assault the tanks. The Imperial fire support was running low on ammunition, the majority of their stockpiles having been left below to enable the rapid the task now fell to them. In relatively short order, the Calambians had crossed most of the way to the column. A hissed report from one of the snipers informed Lazarus that the main body of the Republic forces was starting to attempt a haphazard disengagement.
Oh, they are pulling back.
Presumably having noticed the ambush. It didn't matter, he knew. His men in time to save their precious limping tanks.
Because it doesn't matter if the main body's returning because they were out too far. So they're all on the distance. That makes it, yeah. So they were sighting on the tanks. I wasn't sure how close things were because I have a terrible memory apparently. But more importantly, that's interesting. So the reason the fighting stopped wasn't just because they got ambushed. It's because their support that gives them the heavy armor options is being destroyed and they need to get back to do shit about it. And they're being pulled out of position again so that when the main body returns, they're out of position as well without heavy fire support, which I don't remember or not if Lazarus had access to it. I don't think he did.
Gashed across slurries of dirt and mud.
Yeah, his stuff was all ambushed already.
The rain making everything gray and hazy. Lightning and air power lit the shrouded skies with brief, bright flashes. Spinning, tumbling wrecks of dying war machines fell. Impacts rattled the platform, spreading Promethean fires across the scorched park grounds. Though nowhere close to the Major himself, ahead of him became clearer.
Granted, for 40k standards, maybe not.
Lit both by the flames coating the wreckage, he ducked and wove around two bright blue bolts, and went aground, sliding in the dirt and coming to rest behind a pair of horse corpses, the remains of some of the earlier Rough Riders. The blue bolts belted and jostled the heavy, augmented, the vicious throbbing of his wounds. Lazarus waved.
It's literally a wall of bodies.
Later, 3 Calambians with missile tubes had made their way over to him. What pattern are those weapons? Lazarus asked them.
The blowy-uppy kind.
Pressed tightly against the cold blonde hair streaked over her face and between her eyes. Tread what? A few lances of light toward the enemy just to keep their heads down. Tread feathers, she repeated, unslinging the compact launcher and presenting it as if to show it off. She certainly seemed smug enough about it. Lightest guided launchers in the fleet! I don't want to know! Those slims loaded with crack missiles? The Major snapped.
Heart is an affirmative, okay.
Take your shots. I want each of you to take aim at the third leg of one of those limping tanks. Knock the big steel bastards over, Lazarus ordered. Yes, sir, she said before proceeding to take a knee.
Take out one leg, the entire thing kind of doesn't
others, bracing their weapons and aiming
where did you
carefully.
Get this heart?
Lazarus and his immediate squad poked over their makeshift barricade and opened fire, covering the 3 Calambians as steel followed the jibe, and one by one, the formidable 3-leg tank.
No circumcisions as the freaking war cry right at the end. I mean, dear God, man. I need to compete with this now. You have no idea how hard it's going to be not to use that as the title. It's a horrible title. It's a terrible title. It won't make any sense. And there's no one in hell who should click on that as a title. But I want to. I like this. I like when we have the combined perspectives of major characters. And Fan did a great job just showing the chaos. But honestly, I don't think Fan would do that because that'd be such a cop-out. But 13's a lot. Like, say, we're not going to do a reaction anymore. I'm just watching them. Well, I'm just going to put them on a playlist and just do nothing but that. That is the temptation right now. Try not to give in. Freaking good, man. I've been told Fan does his own comic.